Hello, my name is Andy Walker. My pronouns are he and him, and I am a member at large on the All Souls Board of Trustees. Welcome. Let us gather today as a community, as a group of powerful individuals, each of us seeking similar, but perhaps slightly different truths. Let us welcome one another regardless of gender identity, race, beliefs, or planet of origin. This is a time for all souls to come together as one, whether here in person or via Zoom. Say hello, Zoom. And let me be clear about this welcome. We don't welcome you in spite of your diversity, in spite of how you may be different from us. We celebrate your diversity. We rejoice in your differences. So welcome, one and all. Thank you.
Okay. Imagine you receive this following prompt from Reverend Ron, or in this case, Andy, and you're asked to write a short essay about it. Tell of an important impact you had on someone else's life all by yourself. Again, tell of an impact you had on someone else's life all by yourself. My first response to that prompt was to clamor and sputter that our impacts on others occur from many different angles at multiple points in time, meaning, of course, that lots of different people are required to create those impacts. And in that sense, it's all about community. In which case, there's really no such thing as impacting someone else on your own, all by yourself. At the same time, I had another response, and it seemed deceptively simple. Every impact that I've ever had on others, I've had all by myself. The same is probably true for you. Think about that. For one, I've never been forced to influence anyone else, whether in a positive direction, a negative one, or some combination of both, which is probably most of them. For another, when I've cultivated any kind of impact, it's been generated from some unknown internal source. In any given circumstance, when I've given a canned reply, some kind of textbook answer, or fumbled through an expected saying, then I haven't genuinely connected with the person before me. It's been those internally generated connections that have allowed me to recognize and commune with another person. And in so many cases, the very act of recognizing someone, of simply seeing them, has a powerful impact. Think about that. Recall when you've been the most impacted. For me, that's happened most often when I've felt truly seen. I think that's what can happen when therapy goes well too. The same is true for connecting with family members, close friends, and other people we encounter every day. It's a matter of surrounding people with genuine love and compassion. A couple of days ago, I received another of those helpful Facebook memories, reminding me that all of my favorite teachers have inspired a capacity to pay attention. And they've done that with enormous kindness, warm humor, and immense patience. And while I'm not confident at all that I've been able to replicate this, I'm practicing it. I'm always practicing. It's in this spirit that we transition into the offering. As the ushers prepare to take this morning's offering, may we each look into not just our wallets or our checkbooks to see how much we have with us. Let us also look into our hearts to see what's available there. How much love, how much generosity, how much faith, gratitude, hope. And let us take our offering from that account and perhaps see this as an opportunity to have an impact on someone else's life all by yourself. Options for giving are on the title slide on the screens above me, and they're also being posted in the chat on Zoom.
Stay. All right. Today's service is going to be a little bit interactive. I have 2 prompts for you. I hope you can keep up. First is, if I ever say just one person, I want you to respond with hallelujah, because each of you is just one person. Hallelujah. Come on, we can do better than that. I am just one person. Hallelujah. There we go. Now, the other thing is that from time to time during my reflection today, I may say something that is not exactly accurate. And I'm going to ask, right? And you're all going to shout out, wrong. So for example, 2 and 2 is 5, right? Wrong. Very good. All right. Guys are kind of going off track, but that's okay. I like it. So one point I came up here in Justin's position, and I was given a prompt, and I told y'all a story about my grandfather, who we all called Pa. I'm going to give you a little more detail on that story today, and that's where I'm going to start out. My grandfather lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the 1950s, and he worked for Westinghouse. I don't know what he did. He was a manager type. That's all I knew. And they offered him a promotion that came with a move to another place. He didn't really want to move to that other place, so he turned it down. But the way things worked in that day is that he knew that if they offered him another similar kind of an opportunity, he would have to take it, or he would no longer be working for Westinghouse. Well, the next one that came down the pike required that he move to Raleigh, North Carolina. So he said, okay, I'll move to Raleigh. And that's where I knew him as living in all of my life was in Raleigh. Well, he moved to Raleigh and he went to the Westinghouse plant there and he discovered they had whites-only bathrooms. And he had a strong sense of right and wrong, and he said, this is wrong. So he went to the board of directors for Westinghouse, which is a group of Southern white gentlemen. And every time I think of Southern white gentlemen, I think of Colonel Sanders. But that's what these folks were. And he said, you guys got to change this. You can't have segregated bathrooms. And according to family legend, he did so he convinced them in a very clever way. He said, you're all wealthy men. And they all said, yeah, we're wealthy. You all have big fancy houses. And they said, yeah, we have big fancy houses. And in these big fancy houses, you've got a number of servants, many of whom are black, right? And they all said, yes. He says, do you have whites-only bathrooms at home? And they said, no. Then why do you have them here? And so they changed it and desegregated the bathrooms. It always makes me very proud that my grandfather stood up for what was right. He did it in kind of a unique way. But the point was that he made sure that change happened. And he was just one person. Hallelujah. There we go. Now, today is December 31st. It's the last day of the year. And it's a very big deal. Tomorrow is January 1st of 2024. And we always make a big deal out of the calendar. Now, the last 4 months of the year all have a Latin root that indicates a number. Sept for 7, oct for 8, nov for 9, and dec for 10. Because September, October, November, December are the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th months, right? Okay, you guys are getting the idea. And the reason that our calendar is messed up that way, those aren't the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th months, but they once were. It's all because of just one person. Hallelujah. And that just one person was Julius Caesar. Oh, good, you got up with me, Rick, already. Julius decided he was so important he should have a month named after him, and so July was born. And then his kid Augustus decided, well, if it was good enough for Dad, it's good enough for me. And so we got August. So for that reason, because of these 2 individuals, our calendar does not have the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th months in the right order. They're later on. Around the same time as Augustus Caesar was around, we had a fellow that was born that many people are aware of. His name was Josh King. Well, perhaps you know him better as Jesus Christ. But his name, as best recorded, seems to be translated most to Joshua. And of course, it wasn't Mary and Joseph Christ. So they named him Christ because that to them meant king. I knew a Josh King once, but he never did any miracles. Anyway, some people don't think that Jesus Christ ever existed. And that's okay, because you don't have to be a real person even to have an impact. Next slide. After all, look at these guys. They were never real, and yet we call them the Golden Trio. Lots of young folks believed in Harry Potter and wanted to be like Harry Potter. Lots of young women wanted to be like Hermione Granger. There's probably a few that wanted to be Ron Weasley. Very few, I'm thinking, but maybe. The point is these guys aren't real. These are fictional characters. And each of them was just one person. All right, we're getting good at this. So let's go on a little bit further in history, just moving down the years. We had King Arthur, real or not, doesn't matter. We still talk about him today. We still do movies and other media about King Arthur and the Arthurian legends. William the Conqueror, we still remember him. Genghis Khan, probably not such a good guy, but still, we remember him today. He had an impact. King John, Joan of Arc, got to get the ladies in there too. And Christopher Columbus. Now, a lot of you guys are saying he was not a nice guy, and he didn't do that much. Well, I don't know. He went out to prove the world was round, and he discovered America, right? As a matter of fact, he did neither of those things. Go on to the next slide there. Thank you. The fact is that the oldest surviving globe was made around the year that he set sail. Globes have been around for about 16 centuries before Christopher Columbus set sail. So if he'd have gone to the Queen and said, I want to prove the world is round, she would have said, what? She would have laughed him out of port, and it never would have happened. And it's a little hard to discover a place that already has people living in it. And even if that weren't the case, the Vikings were here long before he was. So why is it that a lot of us were taught in school that Christopher Columbus set out to prove the world was round and discovered America? It happened because of just one person. That one person was Washington Irving. Now, Washington Irving was an author in the early 1800s, and he wrote a book, and it was successful. So he wrote another book, and that was successful. And around 1828, he wrote a book called A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus. It was heavily fictionalized. Well, we didn't have Wikipedia back then, sadly. There was not a lot of fact-checking. And so the things that he purported in that book kind of made it into the history books. And that's why we now think about that. We think about Christopher Columbus doing these things that he never did. And he's not the only example of that. I'll step back a little bit to the American Revolution. Now, if I tell you that somebody went around trying to warn us that British are coming, who do you think of? Yeah, that's not the right guy. The fact is, Paul Revere was one of 5 riders that went out that night, and he only covered 17 miles. And that might seem like a long way to go on a horse, but there was a young lady, 16 years old, Sybil Ludington. She went 40 miles, more than twice what he did. But even bigger than that was a guy named Israel Bissell, went 345 miles for his ride. But we don't know these people because we didn't find out about them. Why do we think of Paul Revere? Because of just one person. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and that's a name we also know. And he chose Paul Revere for his poem because, honestly, it's a better sounding name. A comedian once pointed out that Israel Bissell sounds like a Jewish vacuum cleaner. But Paul Revere, I mean, that's a strong American name. Let's go with that. And so we heard about Paul's wild ride. The next name in the history book I'm going to talk about is Cassius Clay. Who knows who Cassius Clay is? Which of you is thinking of Muhammad Ali? That's not who I'm talking about. Cassius Clay Jr. later became Muhammad Ali. His father was Cassius Clay Sr., and they come from a long line of Clays who were originally owned by the Clay family as slaves. And one of those Clay families was the original Cassius Marcellus Clay. His family owned a number of slaves and a big plantation and all of that good stuff. But he went off to college and he decided, you know what? Slavery is wrong. He went to Yale and he became an abolitionist. And according to one account, he freed his family slaves when he inherited the family wealth and property. And according to the account I heard, he even gave them a little money to get going in life. So he was very much an abolitionist who put his money where his mouth was. He became a politician, and in fact, he went to work for President Lincoln as an ambassador to Russia. When the Civil War started, he convinced Russia to support the Union. Russia, in turn, put pressure on France and England to not even recognize the Confederacy, all because of just one person. As a matter of fact, we all know the Emancipation Proclamation, and Abraham Lincoln planned to release that much later than he did, but Cassius Marcellus Clay, the original, convinced him to do it when he did. So he had a pretty significant impact, I think. But let's move up to some more modern times. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. There we go. You all recognize this lady. And this was a very brave, very intelligent, far-sighted individual. Lucille Ball wanted to make a comedy about a white woman married to a Latino man, which was kind of interesting because she was a white woman married to a Latino man. The network nabob said, nobody's going to believe that. No white woman would ever do that. And she's like, I did. So she and her husband, Desi Arnaz, decided to make their own studio. They pushed their names together and made Desilu, and they produced I Love Lucy, a little show that nobody ever remembers, right? But that's not the last time that she was farsighted. Next one. You might recognize this fellow, Rod Serling. He came up with a lovely idea for a spooky anthology TV show called The Twilight Zone. Nobody thought it was going to work. None of the network guys thought it would work. Lucille Ball did, and she produced The Twilight Zone. And we all know about that today. The next fella came along, Gene Roddenberry, and he had an idea for a show which he called A Wagon Train to the West. And he pushed this to Lucille Ball. She had the wrong idea at first, but when he asked her about it and told her what it was really about, she got completely behind it, even though all of the network said this is too intellectual. It's never going to work. But obviously, Star Trek is still around. Which brings me to the next one, and I always get choked up telling this story, so I'm going to try to tell it straight, but we'll see how it goes. One of the characters on Star Trek was this woman, Lieutenant Uhura, played by Nichelle Nichols. Now, she was just one person, but she had a major impact. To kind of highlight that impact, there's an anecdote told by Whoopi Goldberg. I blanked out, sorry about that. About how she saw Nichelle Nichols on TV playing Lieutenant Uhura, and she ran out of the room yelling to her mama, "Mama, mama, there's a black lady on TV and she ain't no maid." Which is funny, but it also tells you something about the times and the role she was playing. The only thing was, Nichelle herself didn't understand the impact she was having. And after 1 year on the show, she told Gene, "I think I'm going to leave the show." Gene told her, "Take the summer off and think about that." Well, during that summer, she went to an NAACP meeting, a big party that they had. And while she was there, somebody came up and said, "There's a Star Trek fan that wants to meet you." And of course, she was thinking, oh, some Trekkie, some kid who lives in the basement with his mom. But it was Martin Luther King Jr. And he came up and he told her, and this is where I get choked up. He told her that Star Trek was the only show he let his kids stay up late to watch. And she says, that's great, but I'm thinking of leaving the show. And he says, you can't do that. MLK understood the impact his show was having. And so she stayed on the show. And it was an amazing thing. As time would tell later on, thousands of minorities and women pointed to this character as the reason they went into science fields. I think you understand why I get a little choked up on this story. It was a very powerful one. Now you may be saying to yourself, that's great and all, but I'm not a Roman emperor. I'm not a central religious figure as far as I know. I'm not one of these kings or other great people in history. I didn't free any slaves, thank goodness. I didn't ride 345 miles on a horse. I'm not involved in the TV business. How can I possibly make a difference? After all, I'm just one person. So I've got one final story to tell you about this guy. Now, sometime after this picture was taken, this fellow was asked what he wanted to do for a living. And the first thing he said was he wanted to be a traveler. He wanted to travel around the world, and that's what I really wanted to do. But later on in life, he found that he really loved to read science fiction and fantasy stories, so he said, you know what, I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to write for a living. But then fate intervened. Now, some of you may remember the Radio Shack stores. And this little guy loved to go to the Radio Shack stores. One day he went in there and they had something new up. They had a computer up there, but they had a rope around it and little signs that said, please do not touch. And he was highly disappointed. But then one day, the ropes went away. The sign was changed to please touch. Now, some of you are thinking, you know what, that's great. That was probably a decision made in a committee somewhere up in the Tandy corporate structure. And that's possible. But the thing is, in any democratic process, there's always that one winning vote. Even if everybody votes unanimously, there was one vote that was made that pushed it into the majority that made the decision. And even if that's true, pulling down those ropes and changing those signs was a job for just one person. So they did that. And our young hero here, he went in and he touched. He played with the computer. He opened up the user manual and he started learning how to program. And it changed his life. No longer did he want to be a world traveler. No longer did he want to be a writer. He wanted to be a computer programmer. So when he went off to college, he went for computer science. And as he was a computer science major, he occasionally went into the computer labs. And so one day he went into a computer lab and found the one thing that a fan of fantasy novels could not resist, a damsel in distress. Not just one, but 3 damsels in distress. So he went up and he helped them out. And the one who was actually at the keyboard, they became well acquainted. They started dating. And they said, you know what? I just got off a bad breakup. Let's not be serious about this. I'm not after a long-term relationship with you. So 3 years later, they got married. And they had a kid. And then they had another kid. And then the lady of his life got pregnant again. But at this time, our sad hero was unemployed. His wife was unemployed. So they were facing a financial crisis. And she's like, what do we do? Well, our hero had spent 6 years in the Indiana Army National Guard. So he says, I know what, I'll join the regular army and they'll take care of everything. So he joined the regular army and they took care of everything. And they sent him to Fort Carson, Colorado. And because of that Radio Shack guy, he came to Fort Carson, Colorado, and is now talking to all of you about the power of one. But wait, there's more. The product of that financially problematic third pregnancy comes here occasionally. He was going to be here today, but he couldn't make it. My adult son, Mike. Now, as it happens, when Mike was about a year old, my wife and I split. We went our separate ways. But because of that Radio Shack guy that sent me to Colorado, I fell in love with Colorado, and I stayed. And because I was in Colorado Springs and I frequented the Walmart on Platte in 2006, I met a lovely young lady who in 2012 introduced me to the true love of my life, my wife, who has made me a happier, healthier man. And that is the power of one. Thank you. All right. The old year is done, the new year not yet begun. No matter who you are, you have the power to make a difference every day, every week, every month, and every year. Our chalice is extinguished, but our light burns on. Happy New Year!